Oh, didn't see you there. Well, it's come to my attention that some people don't know how to find their psoas after the hyperlordosis post, and knowing where the psoas is important because if we're just mashing around in our guts, we can, at best, just accomplish nothing, and at worst, occlude our abdominal aorta. So that's not really going to be a good plan of action. So this video is going to help you find your psoas. The psoas is something that, when tight, it can cause some pain in the lower back, and where you just sit down so much that it's just common to have a shortened hip flexors, and the psoas is one of those hip flexors. So, knowing how to palpate it and release tension will help alleviate these types of pains that can arise from being in hip flexion quite a bit. So, what we're going to do is you're going to lay on your back and let your thighs sink over to one side. And what this will do is it lets all the digestive junk right here, all the guts and stuff, kind of slide over and get out of our way because we don't want to really beat that stuff up. It will help if you take a pillow and put it between your thighs. I seem to be able to find my psoas a little easier when I do have a pillow between my thighs. So thighs off to the side. Then we're going to look right about our belly button. And you don't have to stick your finger in there, and then find the ASIS. So hip bone, belly button, and we're going to kind of go 2 inches off the belly button. And that's where we're first going to try palpating. And so what you have to understand is when you're trying to palpate something that's deep tissue, you have to get through the superficial tissue because there is stuff like fascia or just general connective tissue that is going to be in the way. So start pushing your fingers down into that tissue and kind of do some circles because that'll let you work and kind of navigate through that more superficial tissue. But we don't want to be trying to go through the rectus abdominis. So the rectus abdominis is a big sheath of muscle on the front of the abdomen, and so what you can do is you can lift your neck up like this, and it'll contract your rectus abdominis, and you want to be just right off of that. So you can see my fingers are kind of right off to the side of the rectus right here. And so remember, we're between the ASIS, which is the hip bone, the belly button, fingers are right off the side. Relax your head back down. Just kind of let your fingers sink into the tissue. You can kind of circle around. And then eventually we're going to kind of reach a wall back there, just like where your fingers won't go any deeper. So this, if you've lined it up right, you're probably going to be right on your psoas. I like to put a little bit of pressure on my wrist. I'm using 3 fingers to kind of get in there. And then I put a little pressure on my wrist. And to check and see if it is your psoas, you give a little hip flexion. And so you're not going to be able to see this on the video, but if your fingers are on the correct spot, you'll feel a little tensioning or maybe a raising or a contracting of a tissue in there, and that is the actual psoas itself. So I'm down in here. I feel that there's something contracting. Oh, look how much. I'm just lifting my thigh a little bit. The psoas sometimes needs to be above 90 degrees and actually to contract, but if you're using this pillow setup and you're kind of lying in a way similar to me, you should be able to feel a contraction just by a little bit of hip flexion, and that's just the hip coming up this way. So from there, I know I'm on the psoas, double checking it right there. And so what I like to do to try and get more force applied is to use those 3 fingers. You can see them right here, and then I take my hand, push the back of my wrist down, and then you can do one of 2 things. You can feather across the muscle this way, or you can palpate it and kind of massage it longitudinally along the muscle fibers. So it's easier to feather across when you're relatively inexperienced with finding the psoas because you don't have to worry about necessarily being targeted along that muscle belly on the way down. So let's feather across. I'm double checking. That's my psoas. And it's just small little movements. You might move the skin. You move the skin over the structure while you're trying to apply force with your fingers. And so you just move an inch or 2 with your fingers. So double checking, kind of feathering over. If you are particularly tight on your psoas, this will probably be painful and possibly unbearable. So that is essentially how you find the psoas. It's not that difficult, it's just that you have to know how to get through that superficial tissue, and you have to know how to try to innervate that psoas by getting a little contraction. So now that we've found it in this point between the hip bone and the belly button, we can move up or down along that muscle belly. So if you go to the bottom of your ribs, you're not going to get a psoas reading like above the ribs, because it attaches on the lumbar vertebral segment. So the ribs attach on the thoracic spine. So stay below your ribs. Just move up about an inch or so from where you went on your first successful psoas reading. Again, check your rectus by lifting your head. You want to be right off that. Just let your fingers sink in, kind of circle them. And if you are a larger person, in other words, if you're fat, then this is going to be more difficult to palpate. You're going to have to get through more tissue. So just be patient. Let your fingers sink through. You get to the wall, let out a little pressure, give a check. I'm not on it. Moving around, give a check. I'm on it. So now I'm feathering across. I think for me in particular, it is a little tighter towards which is the proximal area where it attaches on the lumbar spine. So this area is where I usually work on it. So if you're successful here, we can go back to the first one, double check that you're on it. I'm on it. So I can move down an inch and do the same thing. Notice we're getting kind of towards that inguinal area. So you're going to be this line right here between your hip bone and your belly button. We're like an inch below that. You kind of sink down. It shouldn't be as difficult to find the psoas here, but let your fingers sink. You lift the knee. You should have a strong contraction because it's easier to palpate right here. And you can work across it, feather across. I'm putting pressure down, or up and down with the muscle fiber. When you work on it, do about 10 to 12 strokes, and just call it a session right there. Maybe you do it in 3 different spots, like I just showed you. The traditional spot, belly button to hip, maybe an inch up, maybe an inch below, 10 to 12 strokes, and then come at it later in the day and work on it again. You don't need to mash the fuck out of it the first time. So, if you are, come back this way. So if your psoas is particularly jacked up, by working on it and massaging it, it might basically break up scar tissue, and that's essentially injuring the psoas. And so now what you need to do is use movement and work the psoas in order to heal it. So ways that would include, and we'll go over this another time, but real quick, it'd be something like side planks, Palloff presses, so search that, P-A-L-L-O-F presses, and torso rotations with cable or bands. So that would be some ways to actually get some work on the psoas, because in lifting it should be stationary, so we have to use other ways to get some stress on it if we're going to rehab it. So if you've worked on it and it's particularly sore the next few days, and you're like, oh, I'm injured again. Well, technically, yes, you're injured because you just broke up scar tissue, but you have to regularly treat it because you have to break that scar tissue up, because that's part of the problem. So you use some of those movement-based or lateral shear type stresses in order to rehab the psoas, and then you keep working on it on a daily basis because you can't really ice it. So work on it with those movements and it will improve. So that's how you palpate the psoas. If you have any questions, then put them in the comments.